Vlad the Impaler. Yo, listen up. There was this guy in history so twisted that if he lived today, people online would just say, damn, this man is insane. His name? Vlad the Impaler? Sounds kind of fancy, right? But it literally means Vlad the guy who stabs people on a stick. He lived in the 15th century in Wallachia. That's modern-day Romania. Back then, wars and rebellions were happening everywhere. But Vlad had his own special hobby. Using swords was too ordinary, so he went for full-on human kebabs. He would grab a long wooden stake and drive it straight through a person from the bottom up. Basically medieval barbecue, except the meat was still alive. And it wasn't just one or two victims. This man impaled tens of thousands, turning whole forests into a graveyard of spikes. People literally called it the Forest of the Impaled. One time, the Ottoman army came marching in, ready to fight. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. Thousands of bodies stuck on stakes, blood dripping everywhere. The soldiers took one look and were like, nope, not worth it. Let's get out of here. The creepiest part? Vlad was completely calm about it. Some accounts say he once had dinner right next to people still slowly dying on the stakes. Imagine trying to eat soup while someone beside you is screaming in pain. That's why people called him Dracula, which means little dragon. Later, that name inspired the vampire Dracula in novels. But honestly, the original Vlad was much scarier than a vampire. Vampires bite at night. Vlad? He skewered people in broad daylight, no mercy, no filter. So yeah, history has many cruel figures, but Vlad the Impaler? He was the final boss of cruelty, cold-blooded on another level. People do not remember him as a ruler. They remember him as the man who turned impaling into his personal signature move. Gilles de Rais. All right, when it comes to the creepiest people in history, you cannot skip Gilles de Rais. The name sounds fancy, like some noble knight, but in reality he was more like a demon dressed as a lord. This guy lived in the 15th century and he was one of the richest nobles in France. Even more shocking, he once fought side by side with Joan of Arc, the national heroine of France. Just imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with such a sacred figure looking like a true hero. But behind the curtain, he was a walking nightmare. After Joan's death, Gilles started spiraling downhill. He burned through his money like crazy, lived in luxury, and got involved with weird stuff like black magic, alchemy, even summoning demons. And when the money started running out, he turned to something far darker: kidnapping, torturing, and murdering children. Just saying that out loud feels insane. Historians estimate he may have killed hundreds of kids. And the way he did it was anything but quick. He tortured them, acted out sick fantasies, and only then finished them off. It was like he wanted to savor the fear before the kill. The creepiest part? Gilles wasn't some random peasant hiding in the woods. He was a powerful noble with massive castles and endless wealth. By day, he looked like a knight of France. By night, he turned into a monster. That double life makes him even scarier. Eventually, the rumors spread too far. Villagers were terrified, and even the church couldn't ignore it anymore. Gilles was arrested and put on trial. His crimes shocked everyone, even hardened medieval folks. In 1440, he was executed, hanged, and then burned. That was the end of a man who once stood beside Joan of Arc. But history remembers him not as a hero, but as Bluebeard, one of the most notorious child killers of the Middle Ages. Elizabeth Báthory. If we are talking about pretty but evil in history, then we have to mention Elizabeth Báthory, also known as the Blood Countess. The name alone already sounds terrifying, right? She lived in the late 16th to early 17th century, and she came from one of the most powerful families in Hungary. Beautiful, rich, and full of influence. But instead of just enjoying her luxurious life, Elizabeth had a disturbing obsession: bathing in the blood of young girls to stay youthful. Seriously, who even thinks of that? The story goes that one day she slapped a maid in anger, and some of the girl's blood splattered onto her skin. Elizabeth looked at it and convinced herself her skin looked smoother. From that moment on, she invented her own skincare routine, using the blood of virgins. Yes, medieval skincare, but nightmare edition. From then on, her castle became a trap. Hundreds of young women were either lured or kidnapped into her service, and then they simply vanished. Rumors say the number of victims reached over 600. 600 lives just so she could stay beautiful? That is next level insane. What makes it worse is that in public, Elizabeth still appeared as a refined noblewoman. Everyone bowed to her elegance. But behind the walls of her castle, it was basically a blood-soaked horror spa. Eventually, the rumors grew too big to ignore. In 1610, authorities and the church raided her castle and arrested her. But because she was from such a powerful noble family, they did not execute her. Instead, she was sealed inside her own chamber with the windows and doors bricked up. There she wasted away for 4 long years until her death. That was the end of a countess who had beauty, wealth, and power. But history will always remember her as the Blood Countess, the woman who bathed in blood and became one of Europe's most infamous monsters. Issei Sagawa. If the earlier monsters were medieval nobles, Then fast forward to the 20th century and we meet someone just as disturbing, Issei Sagawa, also known as the Cannibal of Paris. Born in 1949 in Japan, he was small, frail, and looked harmless, almost like a shy bookworm student. But behind that tiny frame was a seriously twisted mind. In 1981, while studying abroad in Paris, Issei met a Dutch woman named Renee Hartevelt. She was smart, kind, and beautiful. Most people would have been grateful to have a friend like her. But Issei's thoughts were terrifying. I want to eat her. One day, he invited Renee over to his apartment to study. While she was reading poetry, Issei pulled out a gun and shot her in the neck. Then, instead of panicking like a normal person, he began cutting up her body. Just saying that is enough to make your skin crawl. For days, Issei kept her remains in his apartment. He ate parts of her body, kept notes like it was some kind of experiment, and then tried to hide what was left in a suitcase. But of course, he failed miserably. The police caught him right away. And here's the wild part. Instead of being executed or locked away for life, Sagawa got out. Declared legally insane, he was deported back to Japan. But once there, he wasn't imprisoned. Nope. He lived freely, wrote books, gave interviews, and even became a kind of twisted celebrity. It's honestly infuriating. A man who killed and ate another human being somehow lived out his life in public, famous for his crime. That is next level messed up. And so history remembers Issei Sagawa, not as a quiet Japanese student abroad, but as the name forever linked to one of the most disturbing cannibal crimes of the 20th century. Ed Gein. When it comes to real-life freaks of the 20th century, you just cannot skip Ed Gein, the guy who inspired horror classics like Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. Born in 1906 in the US, he grew up in a totally toxic family. His mom was a religious fanatic who drilled into his head that women were the root of all sin. His dad was an abusive drunk, so Ed grew up isolated, weird, and completely dependent on his mother. When his mother died, Ed lost it. He became lonelier and more twisted. That's when he started sneaking into graveyards at night to dig up corpses and bring them home. Yeah, that's already messed up enough, but it got worse. Ed would skin the bodies, take the bones, and turn them into furniture, clothes, even masks. His house basically became a DIY nightmare museum made of human remains. The creepiest part is that Ed didn't even seem to think of it as a crime. He treated it like a hobby. He stitched together clothes from human skin, made chairs covered in flesh, even used skulls as bowls. That's not just disturbing, that's stomach-turning. In 1957, police were investigating a missing person case and followed the trail back to Ed's farmhouse. What they found was like stepping into a horror movie set. Piles of body parts and grotesque decorations. The press gave him the name the Butcher of Plainfield. Ed was arrested and declared insane. He spent the rest of his life locked up in a mental hospital until his death in 1984. But his legacy of horror never died. Hollywood turned him into the blueprint for countless movie killers. So in the end, Ed Gein wasn't just a sick murderer. He became the grandfather of Hollywood nightmares. Carl Tanzler, if the earlier freaks were all about blood and gore, then Carl Tanzler, aka the Doctor of Dead Romance, brings a whole different kind of creepy, less bloody, but insanely disturbing. Carl was born in 1877 in Germany, later moved to the US and worked as an X-ray technician. For years, he had this strange obsession. He believed he was destined to meet a mysterious, dark-haired woman, the love of his life. In 1930 in Florida, Carl met Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, a young woman suffering from tuberculosis. The moment he saw her, Carl thought, this is my soulmate. Sounds romantic at first, right? But then it went straight into nightmare territory. Carl tried to cure Elena with bizarre methods, but nothing worked. She died at just 21. Most people would grieve and eventually move on. But Carl? Nope. He decided to dig up her body and take it home, like she was his wife. To preserve Elena, Carl used wires to hold her bones together, replaced her eyes with glass, covered her skin with wax and cloth, sprayed perfume, and even dressed her in a white gown like a bride. Just hearing that makes you want to gag. And here's the wild part. He lived with that corpse for 7 whole years, eating, sleeping, even talking to her like she was alive. Neighbors sometimes heard music coming from his house, not realizing he was basically having dates with a dead body. Eventually, the truth came out. People discovered Carl's beloved was nothing but a corpse he patched back together. America was shocked, and the press called it one of the most disturbing love stories of the 20th century. Carl was arrested, but because of legal loopholes and claims of insanity, he wasn't locked away for long. Later, he even built a life-size doll that looked like Elena, just so he could keep her close. Creepy beyond words. So in the end, Carl Tanzler isn't remembered for saving lives as a doctor. He's remembered as the man who slept beside his dead lover for 7 years. So those are 6 people, 6 different kinds of madness, all proving one thing. Sometimes humans are scarier than demons.